Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So, our president has just shown you that economists do have a lot of imagination. And well, my task this morning is to introduce our guest speaker, who really needs little introduction, but it's quite good to know more about him and how appropriate he is to be our keynote speaker, and how fortunate we are in having him speak at this moment in our country's history. When we have clear signs of an economic takeoff, unless, of course, we shoot ourselves in the foot once again. So our speaker is one of the youngest, if not the youngest member of the Senate, where he heads the Committee of Ways and Means and the Committee of Games, Amusements, and Sports. Of course, taxes and sports are unlikely companions, but they merge into one very well with our speaker because he's well gifted and well balanced in his approach to things. He is, however, very well known as a reformer and advocate of educational reforms, and is currently advocating the tax reforms in order to make it more equitable and progressive so as to broaden the middle class. His proposed tax reforms include lowering the individual and corporate income tax, adjustment of the 38th month ceiling, and inclusion of educational expenses and first family home as tax deductions. Knowing that we are a young population, that sounds like a good news. No? Prior to this, he was a three-term congressional representative from the Lone District of Aurora Province, where he authored more than 60 laws, from the Kindergarten Education Act to the Magna Carta of Women Law, among so many others of national importance. As like music to our economic ears, he also authored the PERA law, the REITs law, the Tourism Act, and more. And as representative of Aurora, he was instrumental in the building and repair of over 300 classrooms, libraries, gyms, and so on, and distributed over 600 computers to these institutions, provided college scholarships to more than 7,000 students and medical assistance to 12,000 patients. As we can see, he has accomplished so much in so short a time simply because he's very talented, he's highly motivated, he's a doer, and is very well trained, as he received his secondary schooling from Xavier School, an undergraduate degree in economics, majoring in international relations from the London School of Economics, and he further obtained his law degree from the University of the Philippines. To cap it all, he got his Master's of Laws degree from the Harvard Law School. And of course, he is a happily married man with 3 children. I really believe that we are most honored by the presence of our speaker, who very well encapsulates the theme of our conference, Forging Ahead, the Philippines as a Developed Economy by 2050, since he will certainly be one of the country's young leaders, or probably the leader, who will bring us to that goal. Let us welcome then Senator Juan Edgardo Angara.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Abola, for the very generous introduction. To the President of the Philippine Economic Society, Dr. Stella Kimbo, I've known for quite a number of years now. To Dr. Jun Tuliao, to our other guests here in the room. We have Dr. Van den Brink of the World Bank. We have Dr. Mira Lau of the UNESCO. We have Mr. Perez of the IMF. We have former Prime Minister Cesar Virata, Ambassador Bill Tweddell of Australia, distinguished academics, thinkers, past, present, and future scholars of economics. A very good morning to you. I'd like to thank you for inviting me, Dr. Kimbo, to what I know is a very, very important gathering. I know that many of our future policies are probably going to germinate in many of the future sessions, not only this year, but in the coming years. 2050 is indeed a very faraway place. My 3-year-old son will be 38 years old by then, and though he does not know it yet, he'll probably be married with kids and maybe some debt, hopefully fulfilling his dream, or my dream, of being a professional basketball player or athlete. Myself, I will be turning 78 years old, hopefully still breathing and married, but I have to cut down on the potato chips. The millennials will be running the country. Perhaps the third President Aquino or President Bimbi to you can tell us something about that. The Generation X will be senior citizens by then, and baby boomers will just be a reference in an encyclopedia, assuming there are encyclopedias. Or if you watched yesterday's Senate hearing, Wikipedia. Though we never know, may kasabihan po kasi tayo tungkol sa mga masasamang damo. It would be understandable to not think about 2050 because it seems so far in the future. Understandable, but not excusable, because that is the future of our children and of their generation. In a recent interview, I was asked if I wanted my kids to follow me into politics. And I said, I really don't know. But one thing I know for sure is I want to provide them with all the opportunities to allow them to build the life they want for themselves. Self-actualization, as we all learned in college. That is exactly my vision for a developed Philippines in 2050. Hayaan niyo po akong ibahagi sa inyo ang ilan sa aking mga pangarap para sa ating bayan. I see a Philippines where the gap between the rich and poor families has been diminished. Isang masaganang buhay sa bawat pamilyang Pilipino. Nakikita ko po ang isang pamilyang hindi lamang busog sa pangangatawan, kundi maging sa pangkabuhayan. Isang pamilya kung saan ang bawat magulang ay may disenteng trabaho at pasahod dito sa ating bansa na naaayon sa pangangailangan ng pamilya. Ang bawat bata ay malusog at may akses sa dekalidad na edukasyon, pagkain, tubig, kuryente ay sapat at abot kaya. I see a country that nurtures and empowers its families. This is clearly an exercise in visioning, some would say a utopian or dystopian exercise, and clearly we're not there yet. Perhaps this is because we, ourselves in government and politics included, have not been very good at visioning. We tend to make our decisions when our backs are up against the wall. Paggipit na, tsaka pa lang tayo kikilos. We're being reactive rather than proactive, not really thinking forward. Many cases in point are our past legislation. I give you many examples. In 2008, we passed the CAAP law, or the Civil Aviation Authority Act. And what was the reason for that? It was because we got downgraded by the US-based Federal Aviation Authority. And in 2011 or 2012, we reformed the taxation of international common carriers or international airlines. And why was that? Because KLM and Air France left Manila for Taipei. We made the switch to K-12 in education policy only when we were the last country in Asia and one of only 3 countries worldwide with a 10-year pre-university education cycle. We amended or passed anti-money laundering legislation when we were threatened by the FATF with sanctions. More recently, we fast-tracked the Marina Law, shifting the training of Filipino seafarers solely to the Maritime Industry Authority, and we amended the Fisheries Code. Why? Because we were threatened with a European Union blacklist of our seafarers and of our seafood. Today, with all the brain power assembled, painstakingly, I would assume, we have a chance which we are not given often. To quote General Douglas MacArthur, there is no security in this life, but there are opportunities. So today, we have an opportunity to share our aspirations, hopes, and dreams for our country for the next 36 years, next 3 decades, and more. To quote a local writer and film critic, Jessica Zafra, who was speaking about the movies when she said, "We live in an age when movies are accepted as history lessons, and our imagination and soul have been stunted by bad movies. Instead of The Godfather, we have Godzilla." But I think by analogy, perhaps our dreams, our aspirations have also been stunted by bad planning, bad policies, whatever you may choose to do it. But probably we should spend less time looking backwards and more looking forwards. So the first step, I think, is probably to restructure the Philippine economy. To get to that future, we need to revisit the basics. Our GDP growth may have been lauded and well noted by the world, but here at home, the reality is that it may not be felt by all. There is a felt need to restructure our economy to be more balanced and broad-based. Currently, we're heavy on the services side, as we all know, and very basic and low value added at that. Tourism and the BPO industry have been identified as among the top industries to pursue. But really, how many people have seen a BPO in Tawi-Tawi? Today, some 12 million OFWs are making a living far away from their families. The future we envision is a future where Filipino goods and products, and not our warm-bodied men and women, are our top exports abroad. To bring them back home, our government needs to step up for our farmers and manufacturers. By 2050, Philippine agriculture should probably more than just rice, sugar, and coconuts. It should probably involve more processing and variants of these. More infusions of technology and R&D will be needed not just to increase yields, but also to diversify crops. Because of our archipelagic geography, we are in a prime position to become a world fishing and aquaculture power, perhaps in 2050. Meanwhile, manufacturing has been expanding since 2010, much faster than our ASEAN average and even the global average. Over the next 20 years, some say that manufacturing will be our fastest growing sector. Of course, the questions are, what will we be making or exporting? Will we decide, or will the free market decide? Where will we be in the product cycle? Before we can realize our potential to these industries, we need to be energy and water secure. Even better, by 2050, we should fully harness all of our indigenous and energy resources, indigenous and renewable energy resources. We also risk our progress when we fail to use water sustainably. In 2050, we would all like to see greater connectivity through infrastructure, transportation, and the internet. I think you saw the video earlier. Many people would want to wish traffic away. All of this wouldn't be possible without adequate and quality infrastructure, a critical factor for ensuring the effective functioning of the economy. Unfortunately, according to a World Economic Forum report, the quality of infrastructure in the Philippines is second to the last in the ASEAN region. We got the lowest rank if we talk about the quality of port and air infrastructure. In the future, we will have a truly unified public transport system. Roads will not be potholed or bumpy roller coaster rides. They will be flooded like rivers. Not only will trains arrive on time, they'll be comfortable, easily accessible. Some will be equipped to carry cargo cross-country. Mayaman man o mahirap, sumasakay sa tren o bus. For once, we won't have to explain away why our airports are in such a dismal state. And we will have a world-class, state-of-the-art airport where people don't faint while they're waiting in line, or they won't have to go to the toilets and say, "Sa bahay na lang." Connectivity will also be assured through ICT and the internet. Our people will find it easier to watch the YouTube videos of Taylor Swift or Ariana Grande, but also the online lessons on disaster resilience, agricultural modernization, or even personal finance. Buong Pilipinas naka-Wi-Fi na sana. By 2050, if we plan and if we execute well, many of the flaws of our economy would have been addressed, allowing our growth rates to skyrocket, perhaps even at China-like proportions. But more than the numbers, we ought to remember what a US Senator, Robert F. Kennedy, said a few months before he was assassinated in 1968. The GNP, or the gross national product, does not allow for the health of our children, the quality of their education, or the joy of their play. It does not include the beauty of our poetry or the strength of our marriages, the intelligence of our public debate, or the integrity of public officials. It measures neither our wit nor our courage, neither our wisdom nor our learning, neither our compassion nor our devotion to our country. It measures everything, in short, except that which makes life worthwhile. He, of course, was talking about the US, but that might as well apply to the Philippines, because the numbers may be good for us right now, as mentioned earlier, as they were before the 1997 Asian financial crisis. You pick up a newspaper today, it sounds, for the younger people here, just like it did in 1996, 97, 98. But we should not get carried away by the euphoria of the moment. High GDP growth masks vast inequalities, broken families, abject hunger, and other associated problems with informality. Indeed, every developing nation should be concerned with economic growth, but such growth should be seen merely as a means to an end and not the end itself. The challenge then is to read through the figures, to see the affected faces of the Filipino families, for instance. As two writers wrote in a book called The Body Economic, economic choices are not only matters of growth rates and deficits, but actually matters of life and death. There is the example of Greece and Iceland, who both suffered in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. Both were prescribed austerity measures, both went down different roads. Each went down different roads. Greece took the pill of austerity, and these writers say that they saw an unprecedented rise in the cases of AIDS and of suicides. Athens, the capital of Greece, which is where I honeymooned with my wife not too long ago, became a city of drug addicts and of syringes. Iceland, which actually was in a worse state than Greece, because their whole, I think of all the countries whose banking system was tied up with the financial crisis in 2008, their banking system was the most tied up. But they refused to give in to severe austerity measures. What they did was they threw the question of austerity to the people, and they let the people decide. And the people gave a resounding no as their answer. So healthcare did not suffer, and the banking system proved to be not too big to fail. In addition to improving our economy, we also want to improve the lives of our working class. Not only have we revisited our current revenue regime, but also we must ultimately reform our terribly outdated and inequitable tax system. I'm lucky to have a capable partner in reforming the tax system in Congressman Miro Kimbo from Marikina, the worst half of Dr. Stella Kimbo of the PES. Though I'm not sure if we can go down or go to the lengths that Thomas Piketty advocates when he advocates a 70 to 80% income tax on the highest earners. Let us do away with the proverbial pyramid and make our middle portion bigger, the so-called middle class. Habang lumilipas ang panahon, lumalawak ang agwat ng mayaman at mahirap. Kasalukuyan, mahigit 70% ng ating yaman ay nasa kamay lamang ng kakaunting pamilya. Stiglitz, in a very well-known article in Vanity Fair magazine, of the 1% for the 1%, said that 1% can have better education, they can have better lifestyles, they can pay for better homes, but for better or for worse, their fate is tied up with the rest of the 99%. There's no escaping that. So aside from these income tax bills, we also want to assist and improve the MSME sector by making our tax laws and regulations more business-friendly and less costly. Professor Ronald Mendoza has also done very useful research in this regard. Gusto nating tulungan ang maliit nating kababayan na makaalagwas sa kahirapan sa pamamagitan ng magandang kabuhayan. So we're working very hard to pass our proposed tax reform, although we have been, there is still that ongoing debate. It is a very difficult question, as all important economics questions are. How do we provide the resources or the revenue for our country to move up in terms of infrastructure, but at the same time allow our families to grow, our middle class to grow? It is a challenge. There are costs, and we are studying it very closely. Dr. Stella Kimbo, of course, was our resource person in our last tax hearing before we passed the 13th month allowance, and I'm sure it's not the first time she'll be appearing before either the House or the Senate Ways and Means Committee. The next step, I think, towards 2050 is to build a nurturing society, to strengthen the Filipino family. Not only do we want to rebalance our economy, not only do we want to restructure our society, we ought also to look at the basic unit of our society, and that is the Filipino family. No doubt the Aquino administration has acted decisively in this direction, but there is much more to be done. 1 out of 5 Filipino families, or 4.2 million families, are estimated to be poor in 2012. This has remained statistically the same since 2006. Moreover, children remain among the top 3 poorest basic sectors. These numbers are quite depressing. Many young people are easily discouraged and feel there is no future for them, at least here in the Philippines. This may be one of the reasons poorer families spend an average of 2.4% of their income on cigarettes and alcohol. Compare that to less than 1% or 0.93% on education, based on the latest Family Income and Expenditure Survey. We want to change that mindset. We want our people to hope again. Sabi nga ni Pinoy noong 2010, pwede na mangarap muli and aspire for better lives for their families. We want the government to recognize the value of families to Filipinos and undertake measures to strengthen them. In 2050, Filipinos won't have to leave their families to make a living. Families won't need to spend as much as 61% of their total income just on food. Every Filipino family, no matter the composition, will afford a decent home and have adequate access to water, electricity, and even broadband connectivity and other basic services. We'd also want every Filipino family to have access to quality health care. For many years, almost 60% of Filipinos who succumb to sickness die without seeing a health professional. But with the Universal Healthcare Act in place, 25 million poor Filipinos can benefit from PhilHealth programs and services. Now the next challenge is for government to enhance the quality and delivery of healthcare services in the country for the next 36 years. In 2010 alone, smoking took the lives of almost 90,000 Filipinos. DOH and WHO studies reveal that 57% of the leading causes of death in the country are from non-communicable or are lifestyle-related. Cardiovascular diseases, cancer, chronic obstructive pulmonary diseases, and diabetes. The state has to continuously come up with measures that ensure its citizens are healthy. But where are the parks and the green spaces for people to walk, burn off the calories, burn off that large lunch or large breakfast? We also need a strong state. This was a theme also during the Ramos administration, most notably by National Security Advisor Joe Almonte, who said, we need a strong state. All these investments in human capital, all these investments in physical infrastructure require a strong state to be operational, one that is graft-free and run by a motivated and well-paid professional bureaucracy. Such a state should enjoy broad-based support. It is necessarily transparent. That is, information about it is readily available and open to the public's scrutiny. It is not held hostage by regulatory capture. This underscores the need for an FOI, or a Freedom of Information Bill. Its enactment could have prevented many of the scams, such as the pork barrel scam and its precursors, given that everyday citizens would have been watching what government was doing. Even at the local governments, there would be a sea change in policy if we pass the FOI. Although many of my colleagues in Congress fear what would happen, because looking at the examples perhaps of the United Kingdom, where the hope was that the freedom of information would usher in a new era of citizen empowerment and awareness about huge contracts which impact on the destiny of their nation. Instead, they were more concerned about what members of parliament had for breakfast or lunch. But nonetheless, FOI strengthens our government's democratic underpinnings. More people watching government's moves definitely means more will participate in government's actions, which are the markings of a truly inclusive democracy. And with more people watching and supporting, such a state would naturally be more responsive and more capable of protecting the needs of its people. For instance, a broadly supported government would be able to provide peace and order as a basis of prosperity. If we talk about regional development, by 2050, poorer regions and provinces would have caught up with their richer counterparts. Hence today, we want a more equitable and fairer regional allocation of government funds. I represented a province for 9 years, the province of Aurora, which was long neglected by the government. And if there is a lesson to be learned, I think a little help from the government goes a long way. Poorer LGUs need the national support to develop. We want more empowered LGUs to become true partners in development. Hopefully, we'll see good results with the Department of Budget's new allocation strategy, which prioritizes the needs of poor and vulnerable localities. According to the proposed 2015 budget, government will pour more funds into some 44 poor and vulnerable provinces. Let me say a short word about leadership. If we look at the history of our fellow Asian countries, we can be provided with inspiration. In the 35 years after the Korean War, South Koreans were able to transform their nation enough to be among the richest countries in the world. The story of Korea is not unique and is just one chapter in the so-called Asian economic miracle. Sadly, the Philippines seems to have missed this memo and was left out of the economic boom. Michael Schumann, in his book, The Miracle, explained one of the keys to the successes of Asian countries. Since the 1950s, Asia has been blessed by a series of determined, devoted, and inventive leaders in both government and business, who to a substantial degree believed their own success depended on economic achievement. The group was a very diverse one. You had dictators, soldiers, economists, medical doctors, politicians, professors, but they all shared common goals, including that goal of elevating their people from poverty. For our part, as observed by the late Claro M. Recto, the political life of the nation was nothing but the politics of public abandonment and private profit. I say this not to dishearten, but to pose a challenge. 2050 is a little more than 35 years from now. If Korea was able to do it, then there is no reason why the Philippines cannot do the same, unless, as mentioned earlier, we shoot ourselves in the foot once again. It has been said, after all, that the story of economics is at its heart the story of human endeavor. Economies are built not by policies, but by the people who craft them. And so, towards the end of my speech, I pose a challenge not just to the economists, but particularly to the economists in this room. Because more than lawyers, engineers, nurses, doctors, bank managers, bureaucrats, economists are arguably the best equipped to chart the path towards the 2050 we seek. Dear friends, you will help choose the steps we need to take. Economics is the science or the art of making choices. And if we want to make better choices, we need your help in this room. The legendary U.S. Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. said maybe a century ago, I quote, "For the rational study of the law, the black-letter man may be the man of the present, but the man of the future is the man of statistics and the master of economics." He may as well have been referring to the policymakers or the lawmakers of the future, because when we talk about economics, we talk about concepts like incentives to policymakers. We talk about concepts like moral hazards, optimizing and maximizing values, the value of competition, the value of information for efficient markets to operate. All of these concepts are important concepts that not all policymakers understand. And once again, let me emphasize that we need your help in this room. Economics will be or is at the intersection of every important policy issue, whether it's raising government salaries, whether it's lowering taxes, whether it's expanding healthcare coverage, even whether it's determining who will be the UAAP champion in 2050. Economics will be at the heart of that question. We can't be turning the next corner without knowing what is around the corner. Again, let me also say something about the importance of information for markets to operate and for countries to progress. We call this era the age of big data, and economists are not without information, the tinder for their minds to fire up and produce bright eureka moments. But even information or official data can be a problem in the Philippines. If you are looking for reliable and specific data, it is not more fun in the Philippines. While a congressman during the 15th Congress, I'm sure you know all of this, that it's very difficult given that information is an economist's bread and butter. But while I was a congressman during the 15th Congress, I happened to chair the House Committee on Higher Education, and I found out that in the 20-year existence of the Commission on Higher Education, there were no studies on all the scholarships. The government gives about 50 to 60,000. Now it's probably over 100,000 scholarships every year. across at least 20 different agencies. And there were no studies on the results of all of these government expenditures, easily 10 billion a year. There was no way of knowing whether the scholarships actually helped our youth. There was no way of knowing if we were educating merely for migration. We were paying for the education of our OFWs. Again, better information breeds better decisions. So what we did was, with the help of the CHED and with the help of AusAid, a government study was finally made to survey the higher education landscape. One of your resource persons, Dr. Paqueo, was at the forefront of that study. Recently, I took over the Senate Committee on Labor. Again, we discovered that data was incomplete. Data was not disaggregated at the provincial level. For example, we had statistics on how much child unemployment or youth unemployment there was at the national level, but when you asked them to provide you statistics at the provincial level, there were no statistics. You could not know how many under the age of 25, how many people were unemployed. You did not know how many people worked or had found work in the last year in a certain province. So you see where I'm leading to with the difficulties. It's difficult to come up with policies when many of the information you're given, as they say, garbage in, garbage out. It's much akin to a doctor trying to cure a patient's liver problems by measuring their blood pressure. Another interesting statistic, which will probably be a footnote in 2050, is that the ARMM, which, as everyone knows in this room, is probably one of the poorest, or has at least 3 or 4 of the poorest provinces of the 81 provinces. The ARMM had a lower rate of unemployment than the Central Luzon region or the National Capital Region. So clearly, we have a long ways to go with providing accurate information. Yet, even with information, economists can sometimes still get it wrong. We mentioned the experience of Greece and Iceland after the 2008 recession. Greece followed through on the austerity, Iceland took the democratic route and let the people decide. In our country, in this context, if faced with similar difficult questions, given our history post-Marcos dictatorship, we'll probably want to throw as many problems as we can to the people. And yet, our people need to be enlightened. They need to know the things they need to know to make the right decisions. And I think this highlights again the role of the economists. All the more should our concerns go beyond the numbers and focus on how our choices do affect the lives of everyday Filipinos. The society we seek is one that has gotten in touch with itself, has properly taken stock of its strengths and weaknesses, and realized its potential and stuck to its core values. We do want our economy to grow exponentially, but we do not want it to be at the expense of the very things that we hold dear. The Indian leader Jawaharlal Nehru once said, "The ambition of the greatest man of our generation has been to wipe every tear from every eye." In fact, that is every parent's ambition for his or her child. Pangarap ng bawat magulang ang makitang nagtatagumpay ang kanilang mga anak. As citizens of this republic, we are entrusted with this responsibility to leave a better future, or at the very least, a better plan for the next generation. Once again, in closing, let me thank all of you here, Dr. Kimbo, and the rest of the Philippine Economic Society for doing me the honor of addressing such a distinguished audience this morning. I wish you a productive day and a productive 36 years ahead. Mabuhay po.